So I guess people have checked out for the holiday already. Yes, the holiday. Please remember, do not come here on Thursday. It's Thanksgiving. It's a university holiday. But also, please remember that this week we have a quiz number 5, the last quiz. I apologize. I think in one of the previous classes I kept calling quiz 4 quiz number 5. I apologize for any confusion. I did not mean that. I mean quiz number 5, which is this week, the last quiz. So be aware of that. And then we have, the week after, we have 2 classes. So pay attention for those 2 classes. Do the readings and whatnot, because you know they'll show up on the final exam, because there's no more quiz after 5. But there will be the final exam, so stuff will show up on there that will be covered next week. Okay? So just be aware of that. Huh?
Will that be on?
Oh, yeah. Yes, read the syllabus, please. If you're worried about the final exam, read the syllabus. It's all described there. So I think I was talking about Jesus, yes? I put a new PowerPoint, made some changes and updates to the PowerPoint that's on Canvas, so you can upload the new PowerPoint. I also sent out an email with it attached, so you can see that. Let's see here, where am I? Okay. It's talking about... Did I talk about that? I don't remember. There's so much overlap in my mind. Jesus. Okay, we're now getting into the next stage of the biblical writings. We're transitioning from the Old Testament, what we could call the Jewish scriptures, with the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, although they're all Jewish scriptures actually. Okay, so we're talking about this dude, Jesus of Nazareth, who is the focus of this next period, okay, beginning with the period Anno Domini or AD. Jesus of Nazareth. Went over his dates. There are some early Christian. There's a picture of some early Christian artwork, stories of Jesus and depictions of Jesus from the 200s and various underground grave sites, Christian grave sites. So very early, the 200s AD. Okay, and notice how Jesus is depicted. What might you notice about how Jesus is depicted? What's unusual, you might say?
Those are all Jesus?
Yep. Well, at least, the ones that are the guy standing doing stuff. There are other people in the pictures, yes?
Kind of
looks like he's black? Maybe. I mean, that's kind of dark. That's not, though. That's dark. What else is unusual? What's unusual about the depiction of Jesus? You don't know? Have you seen any pictures of him? Or artists' representations of what he looks like?
Yeah.
Okay, well, do these look like those artist representations that you've seen?
They don't look as holy or someone I'd look up to. They just look like a random person.
Oh, random person.
Yeah.
Isn't that how Jesus might have seemed when he was alive?
Yeah.
I mean, would you have known who he was? Probably not. Yes, Ms. McDowell. He has short hair. Yes, he doesn't have the long hair that you oftentimes see him in movies and in pictures. McGowan, excuse me. Sorry about that, Ms. McGowan. What else? There's no beard, apparently. He looks clean-shaven in all of these portraits. How's he dressed? What's the stereotypical way that Jesus is dressed? When they asked you to draw pictures of Jesus in CCD or Catholic school when you were a little kid, how would you depict Jesus? How would he be dressed?
Yeah. White gown.
Okay. That's kind of like what he has here. What else?
Maybe not dressed.
Huh? Like naked? Like that? Like a loincloth? All right. Like Jesus going to the beach or something? How about a red sash? Doesn't he wear a red cloak? Never seen Jesus with a red cloak? Never seen the statue of the Sacred Heart? Never seen Jesus wearing a white robe with a red cloak thrown over his left shoulder? Long hair, beard. A halo. Is there a halo? Nope. No halo. He looks like a Roman citizen. Short hair. Almost like a philosopher. How a philosopher would dress. Working miracle, but it's clearly Jesus, because he's working miracles that Jesus worked. This is Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. This is the woman who had a hemorrhage of blood, who touches his clothing and is healed. Another with Lazarus in the dead, another with Lazarus. They liked Lazarus because it's a graveyard, so Jesus raising the dead is a motif that comes back. Jesus with the woman, Samaritan woman at the well, in John's Gospel. This might be Jesus sowing seed from his parable of the sower of seeds. So that might just be showing a parable. I guess these are other smaller pictures of Jesus doing things. Is that the Good Shepherd maybe? No, this is, I think, Jesus healing the man who's paralyzed on a mat. Looks like he's carrying his mat. So various things. These are early depictions of Jesus. Our first depictions of the more traditional Jesus, we might say. This one that you're more familiar with, yes, Ms. Bolton, okay, comes from the 300s, 100 years later. That's when you start seeing pictures of Jesus with a long beard and long hair, probably more representative of a Greek philosopher, okay, and with a halo, and the Greek letters alpha and omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, meaning he is the beginning and the end. So he's God, he's eternal, no beginning or end. Yeah, this is our earliest portrait of the traditional Jesus that we know, that we've located, that we found in a catacomb. Okay? Of course, we don't know what Jesus looked like. No pictures, okay? No photographs, no video, so we don't know what Jesus looked like. There are no descriptions of what he looked like. So I'm just going to give you, as Mr. Morita knows, in Christian faith, I go much more deeply into this about Jesus and who he was and what he meant. I'm just going to give you the bare bones thing for, your reading of the Bible. So you can understand what you're encountering, Ms. McGowan, when you read the Gospels. Or I lost her. Oh, well, I'll get her back. Okay. First of all, what do you want to say about Jesus of Nazareth? Well, notice I don't call him Jesus Christ. He is Jesus Christ for me. He is Jesus the Christ. But he had no last name. All right? His name was... Maybe I got to go to the next PowerPoint. Yeah. His name was an Aramaic name, which is Aramaic related to Hebrew, as we know. Yeshua. In Hebrew, it will be Yehoshua, which means God saves, or God is the Savior. Okay? The Greek form will be Joshua. Joshua is the same as Jesus, but from Greek. And there are other variants of this name Yeshua that we have in Hebrew. Hosea or Hoshea is a variant of that. So it's actually a common Jewish name. It's not an uncommon name. But this is a personal name that means God saves. And that was his name. Okay? And he's called the Christ, which is his title, because he had no last name. Okay? People in ancient cultures oftentimes did not have last names. They were given nicknames, or they were known by their father. At least in this culture. Maybe there are cultures where you're known through your mother. But you're through your parent, through your town that you came from, through your tribe that you belong to, through the job that you did. Okay? Because they need to specify you. Because there were so many Jesuses. When you just called out in the crowd, "Hey, Jesus!" And you have like 10 Jewish guys look back at you. You got to specify. No, Jesus with the big nose. No, Jesus the milkman. Yeah. Jesus, the guy who took my wife. Just seeing if you're listening, Mr. O'Neill. Jesus from Nazareth. Jesus the son of Joseph. Jesus the son of Mary. Should have mentioned that in the last class as well, where Jesus is called that. Jesus the carpenter. Okay? We see all of these names used for Jesus to distinguish him from others, because he had no last name. Most commonly, he's called Jesus Nazarene, the guy from Nazareth, okay? But then he also starts to be called by his followers Jesus the Christ, Jesus the Anointed, because they believe he's the Messiah, okay? And Christ, as you know, means the same thing as Mashiach, means anointed one, okay? So say anything else more about this? No, I guess not. I'll move on. So there you go. So know that when you're reading the Gospels, Jesus is called all these things, and that's totally authentic, I think, to the stories. Okay, that's how Jesus had to identify, or that's how people had to identify who Jesus was, because Jesus was just such a common name. You needed to say who he was in the community. Hopefully you will read from the Gospels. Hopefully maybe over the break you could read the Gospel of Mark. It's not too long. I know you have other work to do, so when I say it's not too long, I understand. Okay? But it really isn't that long. And if you get it on audio files off the internet and you listen to it, it's much easier than having to try to read through it. Okay? But also I want you to read some sections from the Gospel of Matthew, which supplement the Gospel of Mark. They're added to that. Mainly Jesus' teachings that are not in Mark. Okay? But when you do, some of these people and names and things are going to pop up, and I want you to understand the story, because to encounter the story, you need to, like a friend, you want to learn the details of your friend. You want the person to unfold, right? Unfold their life before you. And so, I want you to understand who people are in the story, and because it then shines light on the story of Jesus. It makes more sense about what it's trying to say about Jesus. Okay? Did I mention Joseph and Mary? I think I went over Miriam last time, yes? Did you move over there? Oh, okay. Mr. Kettner. I'm sure it's fine, Mr. Kettner. I'm sure she's a forgiving woman. Okay, I didn't put it on the PowerPoint. But Jesus had parents. He had a father named Joseph, as it was believed. Joseph, we're told. He had a mother named Mary, or Miriam, in Hebrew. I don't need to tell you what their names mean, doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but not for our purposes. Joseph is a descendant of David. He's of the lineage of King David. So that's important to know. Mary apparently is not. She's never connected with David in the story. So I don't know what her lineage is, what tribe she comes from, but apparently Joseph is a descendant of King David. Okay, and Mary is his wife, or the woman has married, he's engaged to her, which is the same thing as marriage in that culture, until he finds out that she's pregnant. And then we already talked about Matthew. Went over to show you kind of how you go through the scriptures and interpret and look for meaning and stuff. But remember the story in Matthew's gospel, Mary is found to be pregnant and Joseph knows he's not the husband. All right? So the question then is, what does he do about it? All right? So we have Joseph and Mary. Joseph, as you know from Matthew's story, and this is verified by Luke. Luke has another infancy narrative, the story of the birth of Jesus. And both of them agree that Mary got pregnant not through non-sexual means. Okay, Joseph did not have sex with her, nor did anyone else. She wasn't raped. Okay, it wasn't consensual, nothing. It was an act of God. God intervened in some way. They never explain how. Okay? If you understand the story surrounding the Jews, of the surrounding cultures, they have plenty of stories of gods having sex with human women. Notice, having sex with them and impregnating them. So that the child that was born, Perseus, Hercules, whatever, the child was born was literally an amalgamation of the humanity of the mother and the divinity of the god, whichever god had sex with her. Okay? So they were like a half-breed, they were demigods. It's kind of like how they were described. And so they had like superpowers. They were like supermen. They were like super strong or very clever or whatever. And the gods, were attentive to those people, kind of like the God. They're just happy. You're just a regular human who doesn't care about you. So she got that way. But notice what's going on in the story, the Christian story. Because, of course, the Jews, yes, God is spiritual, it's not material, and God doesn't have sexual activity with anything. He doesn't have sex organs. So that's not what's going on here, right? When we read the story, yes, it can seem very similar to these pagan stories of a God impregnating a woman, but you have to understand there are a very different variety. In those stories, the God actually does impregnate the woman. There is a sexual act. Because, here's your point. Because these are stories written by humans, and they couldn't understand in any other way that it could happen. They knew how babies were made, So, anyways, that's all I'll say. But for Jews, no, that couldn't happen. Because that's not God. So how could this happen? How could Jesus be in some way from Mary, taking his humanity from Mary, but also a divine figure, the Son of God? They don't know. Joseph doesn't know. Okay? And that's a real crisis for Joseph. Joseph thinks it's adultery and wants to divorce Mary and get rid of her. And again, God has to intervene and say, don't do that, because otherwise Jesus is not descended from King David. But so even the story, it's almost like a response in a way. A response, especially in Luke's gospel. If you read Luke's telling of the infancy narrative and the angel coming to Mary and describing what's going to happen, it's almost like a response against the pagan culture. Okay? Forget about your false myths of Zeus having a roll in the hay with some woman that he finds attractive. And this is the story. He lusts after them. It's very clear. Zeus sees some pretty Greek woman, and he lusts after her. Now Zeus already has a wife, Hera. He's already married. Okay, even the gods are married. Okay, they have wives and husbands, but he's unfaithful. He commits adultery with this human woman, which I guess is okay because she's human. Although Hera doesn't, it's Hera, or is it Athena? I always confuse the names. Anyways, but Zeus's wife God wife doesn't see it that way. She always gets pissed off. She usually hates the human woman and tries to punish her. Or the child that comes out of the union, like Hercules. Zeus loves Hercules because he's my boy, because he shook this human woman and she had Hercules. But Hera, his wife, always hates Hercules and tries to hurt him. And the Jews are like saying this very Jewish story in the Gospels is saying, no, God did not have sex with Mary. This happened through his power, his creative power. Okay. What do we got in the story? Well, we have some information about Jesus. We talked a little bit about this before because Mr. Plains asked about how Jesus could be born before Jesus. And I told you about King Herod. We know King Herod was born or died in 4 BC. We know that, yes, there was an emperor named Caesar Augustus, also known as Octavian. Who was alive around the time of Jesus. And then there was this dude, Quirinius, who was the Roman governor of Syria, which is up here. He was the Roman governor up here, and Syria had control of Judea. Okay? So at some point in time, Quirinius took a census of Judea for tax purposes to see count the heads to know how much people should be taxed, or how much money should be coming in. He did this in 6 AD, so you can maybe see the problem here. If Herod is born in 4 BC, if Herod dies in 4 BC, and apparently Jesus was born when King Herod was alive. Both Matthew and Luke agree on that, but Luke tells us in his gospel that Jesus was born also when Quirinius did the census, which is in 6 AD, right, Ms. McGowan? Do you see the problem here? 4 BC, 6 AD. It's like 10 years apart, in 2 different time periods. One's BC, one's AD. So the dates don't work. But I think Luke was just trying to be close enough. If you read Luke chapter 2, Octavian's fine because he was emperor during the time that the Herod was alive and when Quirinius did his census. Okay? But it's important to Luke because Luke knows that Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, okay, where the census took place, apparently in 6 AD. But he doesn't seem to know how Jesus got there. And so you have 2 different stories. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this just because, again, it deals with our encounter with the sacred writings and the Bible and truth and stuff like that. Because, you can get a story from a friend, and you can sometimes get 2 or maybe 3 different stories about something, which can be giving you basically truthful information, what they know, but maybe the details they don't know. So they have to try and fill in some of the details. Well, maybe this happened, but I know these 2 things happened. I saw, like say you have a boyfriend and you have a friend of yours saying, I saw your boyfriend and he was with another girl, and, they tell, I think he was at this party, or maybe it was at Target, maybe it was, but I remember I saw him with somebody, You remember the basic, you have the basic memory, but the details might be fuzzy. Or you have to fill in the details, and maybe you extrapolate, well, maybe this happened because this had to happen. And then maybe what had to happen is not true. It's wrong, but what happened actually is true. As we're going to find out in a moment. Maybe I'll make this clearer with the example of where Jesus was born or where he lived. Because he's called Jesus of Nazareth, right, Ms. Bolton? He's not called Jesus of Bethlehem. And yet, both Matthew and Luke agree that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, down here in the province of Judea. But Nazareth is all the way up here in another part, which is called the Galilee, which actually is not under the control of the governor of Syria. It was under the control of one of Herod's sons, called Antipas. Oops. Where are you? There he is. Antipas from Malphacy, the wife Malphacy. Okay. And notice the note down here that, Herod had a lot of other wives other than just these women, married a lot. So Antipas was actually in control of Galilee, and as far as we know, Antipas didn't do any census. So, what was Joseph going down to Judea for? If he wasn't living there, if Jesus was from Nazareth and his family was from Nazareth, right? But there is this tradition that both Matthew and Luke agree on that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, which is very important to them and to the early Christian church because Bethlehem was the village of David. It's the village where... Was David born there? Well, anyways, the village that David was born in. It's associated with King David. So again, it has a connection with the Messiah. And it might be the fulfillment of a prophecy. Matthew sees it as the fulfillment of a prophecy that that's where the Messiah will be born. So Matthew has this double issue. Has this issue that he has the tradition that Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and he knows why, because it fulfills a prophecy, an Old Testament prophecy, that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. So Jesus is born in Bethlehem. They know this. But neither Matthew nor Luke knows really how they got there. Were they living there in Bethlehem and then moved to Nazareth eventually? Were they living in Nazareth and they had to get to Bethlehem? Okay? Because if you read the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is simply born in Bethlehem, okay? Which, he could just be saying, Jesus is born in Bethlehem. And then later, they have to flee to Nazareth because the enemies of King Herod is alive at this time. And King Herod hears the prophecy, that the prophecy has been fulfilled, that the Messiah has been born in Bethlehem, and he sends troops to Bethlehem to kill all the children. So the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, they flee down to Egypt, okay? Kind of like, the Jews fleeing, Jacob and his sons when they go down to Egypt, yes? They have to go for a famine, okay? And then there's the Exodus, they come back. Well, Jesus comes back. And instead of going back to Bethlehem, which could be dangerous, they travel up to Nazareth in Matthew's story, and that's where they settled. And that's why Jesus can be called a Nazarene. Okay, so it seems like Matthew's trying to explain two different things. Jesus is born in Bethlehem, but how is he called a Nazarene if he was born in Bethlehem? It doesn't make any sense, so he has to kind of extrapolate in a way. Luke has the same problem, but he comes up with a different solution. Actually, he has a similar problem. He kind of has the reverse problem. Luke knows both traditions. He knows that Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, and he knows that Jesus is called Jesus of Nazareth. He came from Nazareth. Like Matthew, he doesn't seem to know why. He just knows it's true. But his solution is different. He kind of, when he's thinking it through, he comes up with a different reason why this happened. All right? Matthew doesn't even think it through. Just, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. His problem is how, okay, now do I get Jesus to Nazareth? So, he has to come up with a story. Luke has Jesus living in Nazareth. Mary and Joseph are in Nazareth in the Galilee up here north. But Bethlehem's all the way down here. So how did that happen? He remembers there was a census of Judea by Quirinius, which is true. We know from historical records outside the New Testament that Quirinius did have a census of Judea. Problem is, they're not living in Judea. They're in Galilee. It doesn't affect them at all. And the census makes no sense. So, Luke's description of it makes no sense. When you hear the story on Christmas Eve, they read the story of Luke, and there was a census under the emperor by Quirinius, and everyone had to return to his homeland, his ancestral home. Does that make any sense? That makes no sense. I was born in Huntsville, Alabama. Does the IRS require me every year to go back to Huntsville, Alabama, where I was born, to pay my taxes? It makes no sense. It's completely inefficient. And we know the Romans didn't do it that way. So all these things are like, no, this is Luke's thinking. This is his extrapolation. Okay? What could have happened to get Jesus down to Bethlehem to be born? The best he can come up with, that census of Quirinius. Yeah, maybe Joseph had to return to his home. That makes sense. Actually, it doesn't, but that's what he thinks, apparently. So it gets them down to Bethlehem. Jesus is born, and they simply go back to Nazareth. No muss, no fuss, no problem, no issue to be solved there. They just go back to Nazareth. That's not Luke's problem. Luke's problem is how to get Jesus to Bethlehem. Matthew's problem is how to get Jesus to Nazareth. They have different problems with different solutions. Okay, who's accurate? Are they both just stories? Personally, when I think about it, I think maybe Matthew is more accurate. Luke has the smell more of needing to kind of think out a story of why Jesus would have to get down to Bethlehem. And all of the historical data makes absolutely no sense. Quirinius' census is true, but the reasoning that Joseph would have to go down to Bethlehem because that's where his ancestor David was from makes no sense. It would not have affected them in Galilee because it's a different province. No sense. Matthew's makes a little more sense to me. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and they had to flee to Nazareth because there were enemies, maybe, who thought a prophecy was fulfilled, the Messiah was. Maybe. But then again, I wasn't there, and I don't know. It could just be both stories, whatever. But the facts are that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he was raised and came from Nazareth of Galilee. Everyone agrees on that. All the Gospels agree on that. Mark, the earliest, Matthew and Luke agree on it in their special material from the infancy narratives, which they did not write themselves, but they took. The Gospel of John, which is independent of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John also affirms Jesus is from Nazareth, never mentions Bethlehem. So that's what they know. And in fact, that's a problem for people. Now, getting to the encounter with the sacred writings. When you're reading through these writings, the gospel writings, think about this, that Jesus is called Jesus of Nazareth over and over again. Yet he's supposed to be the Messiah, yes? Well, if you read the Gospel of John, the crowds of Jews, they know their religion, they know what they believe. Someone from the crowd pipes up and says, probably some little kid or a teenager, because, Ms. Bolton, teenagers, says, some little Jewish kid, "Hey, Where does it say that the Messiah comes from Nazareth? Doesn't he come from Bethlehem? Shut up, shut up. No, he comes from Bethlehem. Isn't that what the prophet Micah says? Well, yeah, apparently, because I just told you about Matthew's gospel where he quotes from the prophets. Jesus is, of course, born in Bethlehem. That makes sense. It's a fulfillment of prophecy. So someone in the crowd who knows his or her Bible, is like, wait a second, Jesus. You don't even come from Bethlehem. Oh, it doesn't say Bethlehem. We know where. Actually, they do mention Bethlehem. We know where the Messiah comes from. And we know where you come from. And you don't come from Bethlehem, Jesus. So that's an issue. Nazareth of Galilee. Jesus is a carpenter, a woodworker, is probably a better way to translate this word. That's his profession. What does this tell us about Jesus? It tells us that he was kind of a, lower class person. All right? Carpenters or woodworkers were on the social scale or the social rung were just above beggars. So the lowest of the low were the beggars. The welfare recipients, we might say today. But the beggars in the street. Then a woodworker or carpenter. And then above that would be like landowners, people who actually had stuff, that were the makers and not the takers, in a way you might say. So they were really of a low class. So it tells you something about Jesus. He was poor. He was not, his profession was not well thought of. Necessary profession, of course. He needed people to build stuff, but not well thought of. His town, even when I continue talking about Nazareth, was not well thought of. The town is never mentioned in the Old Testament, which doesn't really mean anything. I'm sure a lot of towns are not mentioned in the Old Testament, but it's not mentioned anywhere, even in historical writings, okay? Apparently it was actually a kind of, like a one-horse little dumpy town that, again, did not have a high reputation. In Palestine, it was not a plus that you were from Nazareth and the Galilee. First of all, Galilee was considered a backwater. Kind of like when people will talk derogatorily about like the South and Southerners in the United States. It's kind of had that kind of idea amongst other Jews, higher up Jews. Oh, Galilee? Ugh. It's like the middle. It's the middle of the country that you fly over between the important places, New York and Los Angeles, The Galilee, You're not from Jerusalem? Or anywhere near Jerusalem? No, he's from Nazareth of Galilee. And we see this in the gospel writings. When Jesus meets one of his disciples, Nathanael, who may be Bartholomew, we're not sure. He may not have had another name. He might be the disciple Bartholomew. But he's called Nathanael in the Gospel of John. When this, guy Nathanael is told about Jesus, one of the disciples goes to him and says, look, we think we found the Messiah. Who is he? This guy Jesus from Nazareth. And the first reaction of Nathanael is to say, from Nazareth? The Messiah from Nazareth? He's like, can anything good come out of Nazareth? He speaks his mind. He's honest. He's like, he's like, Cleveland? The Messiah's coming from Cleveland, Mr. Kazin? Really? That's an issue. Where Jesus came from was an issue. His job was an issue. When Jesus is teaching in the synagogue, you read this in the Gospel of Mark. They're like, where did he get all this knowledge? He's the carpenter. We know his family. They're not impressed by Jesus. Remember that when you're reading the Gospels. They're not impressed by Jesus. Most people were not. And why weren't they? This is just a map at the time of Jesus, the provinces that were there. I might come back to it. So this is the Roman province of Judea. And then Galilee was under the control of Antipas. And that's Perea was under Philip, I believe. Philip also had this part, I think, one of Herod's sons as well. Herod Philip, Herod Antipas. Decapolis was a free territory. It was basically a pagan territory. The 10 cities, it's called, pagan area. So Jesus was actually surrounded by pagans. Okay? Many of the Jews lived down here. Okay? In fact, Galilee was known as the Galilee of the Gentiles, of the non-Jews. So that kind of tells you also who Jesus was hanging with. You know, he may have been hanging with mixed crowds, people who were Jews but also not Jews. And in the gospel, notice the times that Jesus goes into Jewish territory. Like it says he goes into the Decapolis, the region of the Decapolis, sometimes. He goes up to the city of Tyre, which is a pagan city, right? Which is in Phoenicia. They're pagans. They're not Jews. It's not Jewish territory. So he will go into what are considered unclean areas, okay? Because the pagans are there. So he's, in a sense, making himself unclean ritually. All right. The Gospels, also I want you to notice in the Gospels the structure of the Gospels, how they're written. I mentioned the infancy narratives. Actually, only Matthew and Luke have the infancy narrative. But the Gospel, the basic story, we can kind of pick away some other additions, and get to what probably was the essential story that Christians were telling about Jesus. And that got written down. You find this really, I think, in the first gospel to be written, the gospel written down, I think, the Gospel of Mark, okay? We see this structure, basic structure. First, it starts with the baptism ministry of this man, John the Baptist, okay? For whatever reason, I don't know why. If you read the Gospel of Mark, it opens with John the Baptist, not with Jesus. John appears in the desert, dunking people in water, okay? And Jesus comes to him. But that's seems to be the original, where the Christian story would start. This person of John the Baptist is a very important figure. Then we get to Jesus' ministry, and that comprises the bulk of the gospel usually. It contains his teachings, stories of his miracles. Actually, they're never called miracles, they're called acts of power. Powerful deeds. But he heals people. Okay, he controls nature. He casts out demons. Notice when you're reading Mark, how often Jesus is casting out demons. Okay, he's casting the devil out of the world. And one of those stories you might notice is in the area of the Decapolis. He does it amongst pagans, 2 pagans. He exorcises a pagan man who's filled with demons. Anyways, after this, a large chunk of each gospel contains the Passion narrative, right? The story of the suffering of Jesus, his suffering and death on the cross. Right? And you'll see this in Mark's gospel. Martin Kaler, who was a biblical scholar from the 1800s, made a famous statement. He said that Mark's gospel is a passion narrative with a long introduction. Because if you actually physically go through Mark's gospel and look at the chapter where the passion starts, a large chunk of Mark's gospel is actually given over to the passion narrative. In fact, it even begins before that by chapter 8. When Peter confesses Jesus as the Messiah, Jesus starts predicting his suffering. So you can even put it even earlier in chapter 8, and Jesus starts saying, hey, I'm going to get this. In the Gospel of John, it's 21 chapters, the Passion narrative really kind of starts with chapter 13, where John starts talking, starts with the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper. And then there's this long monologue by Jesus at the Last Supper, and then you have the Passion narrative. So the Passion narrative is a big part of the Gospels. That's the main focus of Jesus. I mean, that's why he came. Yes, Jesus worked miracles and stuff, but Jesus didn't cure cancer. He didn't cure mental illness. He didn't cast out every demon that possessed everybody on the planet, did he? He didn't raise every corpse from the dead. Some people are troubled by this and like, why wouldn't he do that? Isn't that why he came? Isn't that what the whole story's about in the gospel? Read the gospel, encounter it. What is the author trying to present to you? It's not the bling, the fancy stuff, the magic tricks. So that's not what Jesus was about. It's this. He's a savior. He's come to save us from eternal death, the second death, the death that never ends, from sin. And as a consequence of that, if Jesus is still dead, Ms. McGowan, he hasn't really saved us from anything, has he? Because if death can even kill Jesus, then there's no hope. What does his death actually mean? Oh, he forgives the sin. Oh, it's the sins of the world. He took away all the sins of the world. Well, okay, great. Rah, rah, yeah, that's beautiful. But Jesus is still dead. If even Jesus, the Son of God, can't crush death, I might start worshiping death. Because that means death is more powerful than God in a way. But the story doesn't end there. The Gospels continue with, but he was raised. This is finally the empty tomb. Okay? And that's kind of like where it does end. Okay? The empty tomb. And you know this, Mr. Morita, from your paper, I know, because I guess you looked at stuff on the internet or whatever, that, Mark's Gospel, it does have stories of Jesus appearing, and all of the Gospels do. They have, after the empty tomb is found, they have stories of the risen Christ appearing. Mark apparently did not. The earliest Gospel just stopped with the empty tomb. Now, I would imagine that Christians were telling these stories about the risen Christ as well, because they believed it. They don't think they didn't have any stories, because obviously Matthew has stories, Luke has stories, John has different stories, so there were stories out there. What happens with Mark's Gospel, we don't know what happens. It just stops with it has the empty tomb. The women are, an angel appears and tells the women who have come to the tomb to anoint the dead body. They weren't expecting a resurrection, but they were going to anoint the dead body. And the angel says he's not here, he's been risen. Okay, fine. So it announces the resurrection. And then the women run away, and they don't tell anybody. They don't tell anybody anything, apparently. And then it just stops in the Greek. Okay, in mid-sentence, it stops. All right? If you read in the English, they don't do this in English. They really should, because they should try to be literal here to give you a sense of what happens. But in Mark's says, this is Mark chapter 16, verse 7. The angel says to them, I'll start with verse 6. The angel says to them, I'm assuming it's an angel. Mark says it's a young man. But it seems, angels are described in that way. They appear as young men, very youthful. Do not be amazed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, the crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look where they laid him. Gives them evidence, He knows where evidential begins. All right, you don't believe me, look in the grave. See that the body's not there anymore. But go and tell his disciples and Peter, specifically Peter, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him as he told you. Okay, so there's this idea that they have to go up to Galilee to see Jesus again. You have no idea why. It's never really fully explained in any of the Gospels, but there seems to be this tradition that the apostles had to leave and go to Galilee, and there Jesus would appear to them as the risen one. But anyways, so the women went out and fled. They ran for their lives, fled from the tomb, seized with trembling and bewilderment. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's kind of interesting, because didn't the angel specifically just tell them, go tell the disciples, especially Peter, go tell them that he's been raised from the dead? And they absolutely disobey this command? They tell no one nothing? Puzzle. But what it really, literally, if they did a literal translation, it would be, the women said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid that... ... And if you're reading that, you'd be like, well, they were afraid that what? That it was going to rain that day? They get caught in the rain? That what? What were they afraid of? That's how it ends in the Greek. It ends in mid-sentence. And so there are all sorts of theories about why maybe the simplest one is that just Mark stopped writing at this point, and he never finished his gospel, and something happened, and this was the form that the gospel was had, so that's what the copyists copied, because what could they add on? They didn't know what Mark was going to write after that. Mark didn't finish it. It could be a literary device where Mark is ending the gospel that way in a sense of tension to make you think like, yeah, what is that? What were they afraid of? And it kind of leads you to reflect on the rest of the gospel or about the resurrection. Maybe it's a literary device, very genius literary device. Maybe Mark, the original text was defective. It got torn, and the original ending was torn off at that point. And so we don't have the actual original ending. That's all the copyists had, so they had to end at that point. Maybe. We don't know. We don't know. If I had to place my bets, I guess the simplest explanation is that Mark just stopped there. And for some reason, he didn't get back to finishing his email. You know what I'm saying? It was his draft, Mr. Morita, and it's still in the draft box. And that's all, you take it out of the draft. Oh, well, what am I going to do with this? Matthew wrote this, he doesn't finish it, but I want to preserve it, so this is what we preserve. And then later on, very early on, some Christian somewhere, we don't know who, did add an ending to Mark's gospel with resurrection appearances. Okay? Probably not the writer of Mark, but somebody did, and the church has always accepted this as canonical. It's part of the gospel of Mark, even though it's not originally part of his gospel. At very early time. So this is the basic structure of the story of Jesus. John the Baptist, Jesus' ministry, his suffering and death, his resurrection, the finding of the empty tomb. Okay? We could also include the resurrection appearances, I think, because they are in the three other Gospels, even though Mark doesn't originally have them. What was Jesus' purpose? Okay, I told you some of the things he did, but in general, and again, I'm collapsing. I'm giving you a Cliff's Notes version here of all what was Jesus about. If you read the Gospel of Mark and the other Gospels as well, the main thing that Jesus was about was preaching about this thing, the kingdom of God, the rule of God. You have a definition there. That was his image. And it was meant to describe that God is now in charge. And everyone needed to convert, to change their lives. See if I can turn on here. Yes, I do. To change their lives in accord with that and live according to God's rule. That was Jesus' main message. It wasn't the miracles or the exorcisms or the controlling of nature, stuff like that. Those are all part of it, and those are all actually indications of the coming of the kingdom of God, because, things have been corrupted by sin and death and evil, not just man's evil, but the evil that we're tempted to by the evil one, the devil. Hence, Jesus goes about kind of demonstrating what the kingdom looks like by making things right. Sickness it's a corruption of the kingdom that God wants. People should not be sick and die. They shouldn't get cancer. They shouldn't be born deformed, like without a skull or something, or with the heart on the outside of the body. And these things shouldn't happen. God doesn't want them to happen. And I know people will be like, well, then why does God allow it to happen? Well, because God allows the world to work the way it works. And as you get older, maybe do a little deeper study, you might find out we eat a lot of junk. We're exposed to a lot of different junk. So I don't place my blame on the Lord. I might place my blame on this computer that's emitting radiation, or the food that I'm eating that's full of poisons. Literal poisons. I'm not saying, but they're allowed in small, because you don't need a lot of it. You don't need a lot of Chips Ahoy cookie. If you eat a lot, then it would be a problem. But they put just a little bit of some of these products, because you have to ask, why are they banned in Canada? Why are they banned in the European Union? But we can use them here. It's true. Because they're carcinogens. So you wonder why people get cancer, why people have birth defects, maybe it's not God. Oh, at least I'll blame God later, you know. I can blame Procter and Gamble first, or human activity first. You know, a woman drinks during her pregnancy and she has a child who's born autistic. Maybe there's no cause and effect, but they do tell you don't drink when you're pregnant or smoke. You know? So Jesus is putting these things right because these should not be. Part of this is changing human behavior, conversion, changing human behavior. But those things that can't be changed, Jesus intervenes. He heals people who are crippled, people who have illnesses. He casts out the devil, the one who tempts people to do evil things. What else? He raises the dead. He raises people who have died from death, because death is not part of God's plan as well. So he's showing what the kingdom should look like. Okay, he's establishing it. It's not done yet. He predicts, because when Jesus talks about it, it's like the kingdom is here with me, because I'm the proclaimer of it. But it's also something that he talks about will be fulfilled in the future. So it's not complete with him, but it's present with him. He's the king of the kingdom in a way. Well, actually, I should say it's the kingdom of God. But he's the bringer of the kingdom. God is bringing the kingdom through him. That's what Jesus is about. And so your response should be to change your life. So Jesus talks a lot about conversion. Changing your mind. Metanoia. Meta being beyond something. But also the sense of change. And nous. Nous, which means mind. Mind. The word conversion actually comes from converso, which means to turn around, which is an interpretation. It's not maybe the best translation. It's certainly not a literal translation of metanoia. So when Jesus tells people to repent or convert, he's saying change your heart, we might say, in modern English, rather than change your mind. Or you could say turn around, okay? From what? From what you've been doing. So, yeah, part of the kingdom again was Jesus had to hang out in places where the kingdom wasn't to bring the kingdom. So he hung out with sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors, I would imagine thieves as well, or people who are not living according to the Jewish law, unclean people. Because Jesus is criticized for this, and you'll read this in the gospel. Jesus is criticized for it. And Jesus' response is, a doctor needs to be at a hospital, basically. A doctor needs to be around sick people. He's not around healthy people. They don't need a physician. The sick need them. So, the view that you get in the world that you see on television, like Family Guy or, in the movies or something like that, of this kind of hippy-dippy liberal Jesus who's like, hey, okay. Jesus is like there smoking a joint. Like, hey, it's okay, what you doing? God loves you, God bless you, No. You'll read the Gospels. Jesus is very severe on people who won't change. He says, I've come to save what was lost. So he refers to them as the lost. He refers to them as sick people. Those who are sinners are sick and they need a doctor, which is him. I'm their doctor to bring them healing. I don't, has anyone condemned you, woman? I don't condemn you either, but go and don't sin anymore. Don't commit adultery anymore. Don't rob people anymore. Don't lie to people anymore. So he's not a cream puff. He's not a pushover. He has Jesus has some standards for his followers. And he does gain followers. And out of his followers, he establishes a community, what he calls the 12 apostles. Apostle is a special word because it means an ambassador and an emissary. Jesus apparently uses this word, probably not in the Greek, probably an Aramaic word, but he calls them apostles because he's going to send them out to teach his message. So, Jesus is already forming a structure. He's forming what we'll call a church, okay? He's forming a hierarchy in a way, a form of government. He appoints, out of all of his followers, he takes 12 men And he lets them share in his power. He gives them the power to heal like he's healing. He gives them the power to raise up the dead like he's been doing. He gives them the power to cast out evil spirits like he's been doing. So they now share in his powers. And they're supposed to continue these things after he's gone. Oh, I should also add forgiving sins. Another thing. The destroyer of the soul. Sin itself. So he gives them the power to do that even. To take away sins. Which he is doing. And he sends them out to do this. 12 apostles. Why 12? Well, think back, Mr. O'Neill. Where do we see 12 in the history of the Jews? Where do we see 12 in the history of the Jews? Why is 12 important to the history of the Jews? What do you think? Don't know? Okay, that's fine. Form of knowledge. Anyone want to take a shot at it? Where we heard number 12 in the history of the Jewish people, of the Israelites?
Low tribe.
The 12 tribes of whom? Are you looking at your notes? Shame on you. Taking notes. What's wrong with you? Yeah, look at your notes. 12 tribes of what or whom?
12 disciples. No, there's not two.
No, but you're on the right track, sir. There are 12 family groups derived from
So there's 12 tribes of Israel.
Israel, who is named Jacob, one of the sons or the grandson of Abraham, yes? It is from Jacob that they take their name of Israelite. Okay? From his son Judah that we get the name Jew. Yes. So Jesus is apparently symbolically restoring the 12 tribes. Remember, they were destroyed, right? The Assyrians took away 9 of the tribes from the northern kingdom. There are 3 tribes in the south, Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin, left. The kingdom of Judah, then they were destroyed by the Babylonians. Who knows what tribes came back? Jesus is restoring them symbolically. The kingdom is coming back. Even the kingdom of David, one might say. Okay. Jesus has followers. People follow him. Some people think he is the Messiah. Notice when you read the Gospels, encounter the Gospels. Mark, Matthew, and if you want to read the other Gospels, Luke and John, not one of them, they want you to believe that Jesus is the Christ, obviously, because they believe that. But not one of them really makes an argument in a way. Not clearly. In fact, like in the Gospel of John, he goes out of his way to mention how people opposed Jesus and questioned Jesus and challenged him. You know, that he was not the Messiah. Some people believed it, but a lot of people didn't. They're honest about this. You know, it's not, they're not propagandistic in that way, interestingly enough. They're documents of faith, but they're not trying to convince, because Jesus oftentimes doesn't come out and say he's the Messiah. Once or twice he does, and maybe he hints at it in a number of ways by things that he does and names that he uses to call himself and stuff like that. You know, Mr. Morita from the Son of Man, when I talked about the Son of Man. But it never makes an argument. It's almost like it wants the reader, through the encounter with Jesus in the gospel, for him or her to make that decision and come to that act of faith saying, yeah, I can see how Jesus is the Messiah. Because not like the Gospel of Mark ends with oh yeah, the empty tomb. And by the way, this proves Jesus was the Christ, right? Smack you in the face with it. No, Jesus was opposed. There were people who don't believe that he's a good man. Think of that when you're reading the Gospels as well and encountering them, because you might encounter them and think, oh, Jesus is a good man. He's a righteous man. But notice how many times people say he's not. In the Gospel of Mark, his family, his mother, and his brothers and sisters, they're called, think Jesus is crazy. They think he's gone nuts. Apparently this is not the woodworking son that Mary has known. And some members of his family try to come and take him physically to do an intervention on Jesus, to take him away because they think he's out of his mind. Others say he's an agent of Satan. He's an agent of the devil. That's why he's able to work these miracles. But he does other things. He teaches people to break the Sabbath law, to work on the Sabbath, to do work on the Sabbath. He hangs out with people who are unclean, who aren't living a proper Jewish life. People who are prostitutes and stuff like that. Bad people. They don't see that they've changed. They don't care about that. They're always prostitutes and sinners. So they think that Jesus is an agent of evil. They say this. So he's delusional. He's evil. These are some of the ideas. He's demon-possessed. I think that he might be possessed by the devil himself if he's not working on behalf of the devil. Or he's just a bad man. He's a breaker of the law. He's just a bad man. All of these come up in the gospel. They don't try to paper over it for you. They don't try to hide it, which they could have. Could have just said Jesus was perfect. Everyone loved him. Like if you read stories of, like, say, other religious figures like the Buddha. They read many scriptures of the Buddha. I haven't read them all, but you read stories about the Buddha. Buddha knows everything. Buddha is perfect. He has the answer to every question. Everyone seems to love him. Or if they don't love him, then he does something that causes them to reach enlightenment, and they all, even the gods bow down before the Buddha. Okay? Jesus ends up there. Why? Why did some people hate him so much that he had to die? Well, the main charge is blasphemy. Jesus is not killed, at least from the Jewish perspective. The Romans will have another perspective that we'll talk about later, maybe in the next class, because I don't think I'll get through all of this. But one of the main charges against Jesus was that he was a blasphemer. The things that he was doing, the teachings he was giving, where he would, he wasn't like a prophet speaks in the name of God, Thus says the Lord. I received this message from the Lord. Thus says the Lord, You see this all the time in the prophets. They speak in the name of God, not their own name. Jesus never does this. Never. In fact, he uses the word language of prayer, that you will pray to God in regards to himself. Amen, I say to you. Like he's praying to himself. Like, whatever I say, that's it. Amen. Or amen, amen, if you really want to feel being better. But he changes teachings. He says, okay, the law of Moses said that God gave Moses says to do this, but I say to do this. This is how I interpret. Now, this is how I want you to act. Okay, but God gave that to Moses, so you're just a woodworker, Jesus. You're not God. How can you, this was puzzling to people. And that's why people hated him, because they knew exactly what he was doing. He was placing himself above God. Blasphemy. He was showing a lack of respect for God. Blasphemeo. Speaking evil of, profaning God, making the sacred as if it's normal, like you have control over it. Taking sacred things lightly. Or very simply, showing a lack of respect for God. Okay? Claiming to forgive people's sins. Well, God gave us the temple where you go and offer sacrifices for your sins to be forgiven. No, you don't need to do that. You come to me, Jesus. I'll do it. Oh, really? Jesus didn't have to say he was God or that he was the Messiah. The things that he was doing and saying were enough for people to kind of figure out this is what he's claiming. And the fact that Jesus was claiming doing such scandalous things meant he could not be the Messiah for certain Jews. Because the Messiah shouldn't do this. Remember, the Messiah should establish the following of the law. And Jesus was actually changing things. His claim to God was the thing that, and some scholars will say, well, Jesus didn't claim. No, Mark, if you read the Gospel of Mark clearly, thinks Jesus is a divine figure. Okay, I think, that's probably true. But they'll say if you actually read Mark and, you dig beneath Mark's prejudice that Jesus is a divine figure, does Jesus ever really say he's God? No, well, yeah, in one place I think he does. Jesus comes out and basically lets the cat out of the bag, in a manner of speaking, at his trial. But mostly no, he doesn't come out and say that like he needs to, But people are still, read the reactions in the gospel that people have to him. Okay, it's not just that he is, a bad teacher or something like that. Okay, he's a bad man. He's delusional. Okay, he's doing things with the law and the practice of Judaism that no man should have control over because they come from God. Okay, this is where the blasphemy charge comes in, and that seems to be where the religious Jews oppose Jesus, the religious leadership, is that he's blaspheming. He's showing an improper respect for God. And that when he has his trial, and I got you, they'll end with this. When Jesus finally has his trial and they ask him, maybe we'll read that next time. Yeah, I think I'll finish with this and then we'll read because I think I want to go into that. So I end here. God bless you. Have a good holiday. Be safe. Don't do anything crazy, Mr. Kazin. Not that you would, but be safe and come back to me, please. And remember Quiz 5, and God bless you all. And
All right, thank you.
you're welcome, sir. You too. We lost a lot of people today, Mr. O'Neill. I'm glad to see you, Mr. Morita. You're suffering with me 2 times a day, Mr. Morita.
Have a good day, Bishop.
Thank you, sir. You too. Mr. O'Neill.